So I have to be a real business, solving real client problems to generate real value, to be able to offer real jobs. So yes, we have to be serious.
Welcome back, everybody. Rich Bigger, Shanghai-based social entrepreneur. I'm in Saigon this week meeting with Colin Blackwell and a number of others. Had a great conversation about the work he's been doing. We talk about how he got into this, what led him to it, some of the processes he's learned, but also shares a couple stories of success. So thank you very much for taking the time. To be fair, and just tell the community a little about your personal history and the background of Enablecode.
I'm Colin Blackwell. I'm originally from England. So I was first here in 1995 with a bit of a human resource background. I came back with a view to doing something a little bit more constructive, create jobs, but especially for those who are most vulnerable in society.
What is Enablecode? What's the organization? What's your mission?
Our mission is to get people with disabilities or disadvantaged who wouldn't otherwise be included in the workforce, included in jumping straight ahead into the very future-proof kind of work. So as AI becomes mainstream, most jobs which had been designed to be very process-orientated can now be done by computers for free. And most education systems also were very much training people to be little computers, and now the AI is like, I've got that covered, no need anymore. So you're left with only human tasks, which the education system hasn't ever covered, which is very threatening for the majority of the workforce and very disruptive in ways. But suddenly levels the playing field and allows people with disabilities or disadvantage who didn't have the time or the ability or the money to go through, let's say, university. That doesn't matter anymore for them or other people. So suddenly, if they're bright enough, they could jump straight in to this kind of work with the AIs and machine learning.
When you started this, where did you really come from? What was the idea that you were trying to tackle?
When we were looking at economic exclusion in Vietnam, and poverty's been eliminated largely in Vietnam. So when I was first here, it was 60%, now it's 6%. But how do you target assistance to that 6% and who are they? And it's mostly people with disabilities. Why are they poor? Because they don't have work. Why don't they have work? Why aren't they included in the workforce? And that is a very difficult, complex question. And in Vietnam, there's a number of cultural aspects as well. So the Vietnamese have very strong family units and are very caring and protective. But when they see a disabled person, they say, okay, this person's a dependent, so we have to, through love, protect them. Right. So why would you send a disabled person to school? Because they can't get work anyway, so you're just being unfair on them. Now, how in a pragmatic East Asian culture do you change that perception? Well, you get a few people who are disabled and you get them doing advanced work, the most advanced work, and then publicize it. And then you change the perceptions. So we had to, rather than being some kind of random Western ideologues who are going to say, oh, in my country we do it this way, I've got to prove it works in a Vietnamese context.
So then how do you identify and onboard these individuals that you want to bring into the platform that you've built?
The easiest place for us to start is with the international charities. They're already doing great work. The people don't have the immediate concerns that they're hungry or medically ill or something like that. They're being offered some literacy training and so on already, and the foreign charities immediately understand what I'm trying to do. So these are very often children's charities, and the assistants, the beneficiaries, drop us off automatically at age 22, 24, something like that. So if I go to a British or an American charity and say, look, okay, let me give some sustainable help to your people, right, get them into work quickly while they're still in your system, of course they're delighted.
Are we talking about thousands you could help, hundreds of thousands?
If we got it working well, yes, we could get work for thousands of people easily. But it's getting that formula right, and that if it was easy, it would already have been done.
So then what are the challenges that you see, like just keep popping up?
So a good example we had was, I had some of my disabled people who are working well, and using one of the UN ideas that you don't speak on behalf of disabled people, you let them speak for themselves. So I had a few really successful people with physical disabilities presenting at the Saigon Innovation Hub. And I said, okay, you guys design a presentation to make, how you're working and how you're managing your life. And I just sat back in the audience and watched with the translator. And I thought it was going great. So all of the people in the audience were saying, yeah, we'd love to work, we'd love to be like you. And I was like, great. And I told people I'd try and sign them all up quickly. So we got all of their details, they're all on Facebook. We had a group going. And then the first project comes in. Yeah. And I'm like, great, this is going to be simple. Just post up the job, and no one applied. And okay, it didn't work out. But we know this is difficult. So how would you approach it in a different way? So the people wouldn't have the confidence just to apply for the job or couldn't quite understand what it was going on. So this is where I adjusted then. I started trial and error. So I'd bring loads of people into my office and I'd show them what the job is, project by project, let's say image recognition. And then at the end of the training, say, do you reckon you could do that? And then they say yes. So it had to be a more gentle onboarding process.
But scaling that up to me sounds really difficult.
So you're working with an AI is something very, very new to do. And from an HR perspective, I was absolutely fascinated by the concept of what are the human tasks remaining and how do you work with an AI? So I've got some colleagues who work with AIs, and I'm like, show me what that task is, so I can really get my head around what skills you'd need to work on it. And that's new for everybody. But people with disabilities, they seem good at that. The skills are childhood development skills of common sense. If people have missed that as a child, how do you get that skill into an adult is very difficult. We know that. How do you then get that in a cultural context for a Vietnamese person who is also disabled with a confidence issue? It's even more difficult. But in a way, because it's such an extreme challenge, you start noticing things you wouldn't otherwise see because the problem is so obvious. And then you can start experimenting with ways to get around that.
Can they go further than that? Can they start to code? Are they more likely to open up and want to study something else? Like, how are you making this more of a lifelong, once you're empowered to be comfortable on a path that we're constantly challenging yourself, or the growth comes a little bit more naturally?
So yes, you start with BPO, and we're designing then a career path for people. So I have an ecosystem, firstly of charities to supply candidates, but then of businesses who are doing a bunch of things, and they're specialized in what they do, in search engine optimization, in software, in whatever. So they can still deliver the client quality, but they agree when I refer them work to give opportunity to people on my database, and I could guarantee in turn that I'm going to give them someone who's smart with a good work ethic, who's already proved themselves on BPO. So yes, it's an entire sustainable career path.
So then how do you see scale for the organization? Is it breadth? Is it depth? Is it Vietnam? Is it UN, multiple places?
So we have partners, and this is why people like the UN and World Bank is interested in what I'm doing, because I've connected educators, charities, government, business associations, private sector, and where they have a shared mission, and you start getting a joined up thinking on it. But where the charity has already spent the money on the beneficiary, I don't need to. The employer already has the demand, right? So just connecting it together, you don't need a big workforce on doing that. Part of it is volunteers. So actually you don't need really any investment at all. You don't need funding. If you get something working, money starts flowing, people share the risk, they share the reward. So, okay, you've identified that opportunity, and then the rest of it should fall into place. The charity is delighted to give you their beneficiaries. The individuals are delighted to work. The client's delighted to get the work done. I'm just organizing it in the middle. So you don't need, because you're not reinventing the wheel, you don't need funding. So I've designed it in a way, it's a startup that does not need capital because there's a zero cost base.
So then how would the Vietnamese government come in here and view this as something that they could scale up themselves? Do they need a commercial operator to make that work? Is this something that you could embed into them and they could take to scale, and you're happy with that as your legacy? Again,
with ecosystems, people do what they do best, and there is a role for government, there's a role for private sector, and as a World Bank advisor to the government, we see this a lot. So It's unfair to dump all the problems on either the private sector or the government. They have different roles that can work together. So the government's role is on things like anti-discrimination legislation, providing a public healthcare service with prioritising disabled people, making sure there's accessibility, making sure there are a number of things like that. Employment legislation, that's the government's role. But then from the private sector side, we can collaborate, advise, but also generate the employment ourselves. And we like to be able to take to the government saying, look, I don't want to just be complaining to the government or asking, give me this. I'd like to come to the government and say, look, we've solved this.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you about some good I've done for your country.
Right.
And very often, they're fascinated to hear this. And they often say, how can we help?
Yeah.
We don't have any budget for funding, but how could we help?
So then how do you approach that? I mean, working with government can be an amazing way to achieve scale, but at the same time, it can be an incredibly frustrating process. So how have you found doing that within Vietnam? Do you see natural partnerships, natural alignments, and they're easy to execute, or what are a few things that you found are the best ways to start or develop a government partnership?
Well, a lot of what we're trying to do is change perceptions. So again, it's like starting that spark of just a few people who are doing, I can bring in TV cameras and say, hey, look, here's a person, a Vietnamese person in a wheelchair, working on machine learning with an American AI.
Yeah.
Dream job, right? But you get that on camera, and then you're changing the perception. So the parents of a disabled child would see that and say, oh, where's that economic motive? That child, off to school you go, because now you can have a life. I've seen it on TV. So if I have an ask from the government, and a lot of the media here is often government owned.
Sure.
So I asked them, saying, hey, look, do you want to send some cameras around to the office and see it? And do the publicity for us of the social message. And they're delighted to. So I've had police TV, I've had all the big stations. That's the way they can help. They want some decent content as well. Or sometimes, if I'm doing some public speaking, they can give the venue.
Okay.
They can give access to their, where they have disability shelters or other protection centres.
Sure.
They are very happy to invite us in.
Yeah.
So that's the way they can help. I'm offering something. It's win-win.
Yeah. Well, it's also easy to understand. There's a clear delivery, clear expectation, and both sides know what's going to come out of it.
Yes, and because it's very new here, it forces us, necessity is the mother of invention.
Sure.
It forces us to think of win-win situations. If I was doing this in Singapore and the Singapore government was like, okay, fill in this form to get some money, it's going to almost encourage me to be a little bit, I don't know if lazy is the right word, but I'd be like, oh, cool, thank you, money. I'll fill in that form.
Yeah.
Whereas here, that isn't an option. So I've got to think of something smarter. And that being smarter, actually then, because I'm being forced to being smart, that is what could be used as a global case study.
So how do you define success for yourself and for the organization?
It's a number of people working on projects, to what volume, and then down the track, how many of those then, because of that, get into the wider workforce. Very often with social impact, it's very difficult to measure.
Yeah.
For us, that's quite easy because we've got exact dollar cent measures.
And I think for many years we tried to separate kind of social entrepreneurs from traditional, but in the end of the day, it's a business. And the business tools that you have at hand to deploy against the challenge you see, they're really no different.
Yes.
How you make your money might be a little bit different, how you message might be a little bit different. But at the end of the day, your success rate's based on, do you meet the need that you set out to solve?
Yes. So I have to be a real business, solving real client problems to generate real value, to be able to offer real jobs.
Right.
Because if it wasn't real jobs, they wouldn't be sustainable to give someone a long-term, lifetime career. So yes, we have to be serious as well. We have to be private sector, competing against the best out there, to be offering genuine opportunity. If I was just giving charity, that, you know, it patches over a problem, it gives someone some money today, but what about tomorrow? And that's, you know, you've got to be thinking sustainably now, and charities are always being challenged with this.
Yeah, sure.
And that's where, again, you get the joined up thinking. So businesses now have a more mature approach to CSR and having a social mission embedded in their daily activities.
Yeah.
Charities are now being asked to think more with a business efficiency. So the sides are coming together, and governments converging into that. The stuff I'm doing, the World Bank and UN's converging into it. So it's all coming together. It hasn't quite met in the middle. I'm trying to position myself in that middle spot, trying to work out what it looks like. And of course, I'm one of the few who's actually trying that. So everyone's saying, okay, if you can tell me the answer, we all want to know. So I've got people coming over from America and all over at the moment, quite often from the World Bank, just looking at what I've started. Although it's tiny scale at the moment, again, I've got a basis for deploying the knowledge I have, experiment a bit, trying to work out what works.
You're talking to another entrepreneur entering the space, trying to find their space here, trying to make that work. What are 3 tips that you would give to that individual or to that group of individuals as they're building out? It's the same skill set as the people with disabilities need working with the AI. So these are the human skills you now need. So it's things like humility, empathy, and lateral thinking ability. That's what has value. So if you're trying to solve that problem, you need those skills. So those are the 3 skills, which are the same 3 skills as the people with disabilities working with the AIs. So if I have a Vietnamese person in a wheelchair teaching an AI in America, that's the same skill as needed for the entrepreneur who's trying to define that middle space. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.